8:45 in the evening. The North Arabian Sea. The United States ship Porter and the United States ship Ross were already turning into the wind. This was not a standard exercise in freedom of navigation. Something in the electronic intelligence was shifting. The primary question for the command team was not whether they could hit the targets, but why the targets seemed to be waiting for them. The air over the deck was heavy and humid. The twin destroyers cut through a black sea that offered no reflection of the moon. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Porter, the light was a dim, tactical red. Blue-green displays showed the coast of Iran less than 100 miles away. 6 specific coordinates were highlighted in amber. These were the long-range radar installations that had been harassing international shipping for weeks. Captain Miller looked at the master engagement station. He spoke to his tactical action officer. "Confirm the target signatures are active." The officer responded, "Signals are intermittent. They are cycling through frequencies. It looks like they are testing our detection threshold. Or they are expecting us," Miller said. 400 miles to the north, near the coastal city of Bandar Abbas, an Iranian officer stood inside a reinforced concrete bunker. He did not look at the radar screens. He looked at a simple watch on his wrist. He knew the Americans were there. He knew the destroyers had changed course 20 minutes ago. His orders were clear. He was not to defend the site. He was to wait for the signal to leave. Back on the Ross, the countdown reached 0. A deep, rhythmic thud vibrated through the hull. A vertical launch cell blew open. A single Tomahawk cruise missile rose on a pillar of white flame. Then another, and another. Within 60 seconds, 12 missiles were in the air. They accelerated and turned east. They dropped to 50 feet above the water. They were flying low and fast. The mission was designed to be a surgical strike. It was a message intended to restore order to the shipping lanes. But as the missiles crossed the shoreline, the digital landscape began to change. The 6 radar signatures did not increase their power to track the incoming threat. They began to disappear. One by one, the electronic ghosts on the American screens were vanishing. Inside the Porter, the tone of the room changed, from focused to uncertain. The tactical action officer called out the changes. "Target 1 is dark. Target 2 is dark. Sir, they are shutting down. All of them," the officer continued. "We are tracking missiles toward empty space." Captain Miller did not respond immediately. He watched the digital tracks. The Tomahawks were following their pre-programmed paths. They were blind to the fact that their prey had stopped shouting. This was no longer a strike against an active threat. It was an attack on a graveyard. The Iranian officer at Bandar Abbas stepped out of the bunker. He could hear the faint, distant whistle of incoming turbine engines. He climbed into a waiting vehicle. He did not look back at the $1 million radar array he was leaving behind. He had his instructions. The Americans would find what they were looking for, but it would not be what they expected. The missiles were now 5 minutes from impact. On the American ships, the crews watched the telemetry. They had committed to the strike. There was no way to recall the weapons now. They had fired at a target that was no longer there. The strategic balance of the region was about to change. But the real cost of the night was yet to be calculated. The sun would soon rise over a different kind of conflict. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 9:15 in the evening. The Gulf of Oman. The 12 Tomahawk missiles were now 3 minutes from their targets. On the radar screens of the United States ship Porter, they appeared as a cluster of steady green icons. They were moving at 550 miles per hour. Each missile was skimming the wave tops. Their internal maps were comparing the terrain of the Iranian coastline to the digital data in their memory. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere had shifted from anticipation to a strange, clinical silence. The tactical action officer adjusted his headset. Missiles are crossing the transition point. Terminal guidance is active. We are still seeing 0 electronic response from the target sites. Captain Miller stood behind the consoles. This was the anomaly. A country does not simply allow its primary coastal defense radars to be erased without a fight. There were no surface-to-air missile launches. There were no jamming signals. The Iranian air defense network was not just quiet. It was invisible. Check the satellite feed again, Miller ordered. An intelligence officer tapped at a screen. A high-resolution infrared image flickered into view. It showed a radar installation on a high ridge overlooking the Strait of Hormuz. "Sir, this is Target 4. Infrared shows heat signatures consistent with running generators, but the dishes are not rotating. They are locked in the stow position." Miller frowned. "They are parked. They are not even trying to track us." 100 miles away, inside a command bunker buried under a mountain of granite, General Reza watched a different screen. His room was not red. It was bright and clinical. His technicians sat at workstations that looked more like a corporate office than a war room. They were watching the American missiles. A technician spoke without looking up. "The Americans have reached the 5-minute line. Their trajectory is confirmed for all 6 primary sites." Reza nodded slowly. "And the crews?" "The crews at sites 1 through 4 were evacuated 20 minutes ago," the technician replied. "The equipment at sites 5 and 6 was moved to the secondary locations at sunset. We left the old antenna structures in place. They will provide the thermal signature the Americans expect to see." Reza looked at his watch. He was not a man who enjoyed losing equipment, but he understood the value of a specific kind of defeat. "The Americans believe they are being surgical. Let them have their surgery. When they find the rooms are empty, they will wonder who told us to leave." Back on the Porter, the countdown reached 60 seconds. The missiles were now over land. They were weaving through the rugged coastal valleys of Iran. The tactical action officer called out the status. "Impact in 60 seconds. Still no active tracking from the enemy." "Wait, I have a new contact." The screen flickered. A single high-intensity radar spike appeared on the display. It was not coming from the 6 targets. It was coming from a location further inland. Much further. "Source is a mobile battery," the officer said. "It just illuminated for 3 seconds. Then it went dark again." "It was not looking at the missiles, sir. It was looking at us." The room on the Porter went cold. The strike was supposed to be the end of the escalation. Instead, it felt like the opening move of a game they did not fully understand. The 12 missiles were about to hit their marks, but the primary threat had just introduced itself from the shadows. "Confirm coordinates of that mobile source," Miller said. His voice was hard. "I want to lock on that position immediately." "Negative, sir," the officer replied. "The signal is gone." It was a sniper shot. One look, one lock, then silence. The first Tomahawk hit target 1. A flash of light appeared on the satellite monitor. Then target 2. Then target 3. The screen filled with the white-hot blooms of successful impacts. The mission was technically a success, but inside the Combat Information Center, no one was celebrating. They were looking at the spot where the mobile radar had appeared. The tactical action officer looked at Miller. "Impact confirmed on all 6 coordinates. Battle damage assessment is beginning." "Report it to command," Miller said, "but tell them we have a problem." The targets did not blink, and something else is watching the Ross and the Porter. 9:30 in the evening. The Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar. The digital map of the Persian Gulf was a sea of shifting icons. Large screens dominated the front wall of the command center. Analysts in flight suits hovered over workstations. The mood was not celebratory despite the confirmed hits. The data coming back from the drone overflights was deeply troubling. A senior intelligence officer walked toward the center of the room. He spoke to the commanding general. "Sir, we have the initial battle damage assessment from Sites 5 and 6. "Report," the general said. "The Tomahawks hit the exact coordinates," the officer replied, "but the thermal signatures are wrong. There is no secondary debris, no electronics fire, no cooling fluid leaks. These were empty shells. They were plywood and heaters." The general looked at the screen. "And the first 4 sites? They were real, but they were abandoned. The Iranians gave us the hardware. They traded old radar dishes for time. The question is what they bought with that time." 9:34 in the evening. The Iranian coastline. A convoy of heavy trucks moved through a narrow mountain pass. They did not have their headlights on. The drivers used night vision goggles. On the back of the lead vehicles were the mobile radar units that the American ships had briefly detected. These were not old technology. They were modern, solid-state arrays. General Reza sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. He looked at a ruggedized tablet. It showed the positions of the United States ship Porter and the United States ship Ross. "The Americans are analyzing the scrap metal we left for them," he said. The driver did not look away from the road. "They will realize the trick soon, General." "It does not matter," Reza said. "The trick was only to keep them in the box. Now that they have fired their missiles, they are committed. They cannot leave the area without looking like they are retreating from a fight they started." Reza tapped a command on his tablet. "Signal the coastal missile batteries. Tell them to begin the sequence. Do not launch. Just begin the sequence." 9:39 in the evening. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Porter, the Tactical Action Officer called out a new warning. A sharp, rhythmic chirping filled the red-lit room. "Electronic support measures. I have multiple hits. Shore-based fire control radars are illuminating. They are all along the coast." Captain Miller leaned over the console. "Classify them. They are K-100, 2 anti-ship missile radars," the officer said. "I count 12. No. 14 separate sources. They are painting us, sir. They are locking on." Miller gripped the edge of the table. The situation had escalated past a simple retaliatory strike. The Iranians were not hiding anymore. They were standing up. They were showing the Americans exactly how many ways they could die. "Set general quarters," Miller ordered. "I want the close-in weapon system to stand by. Ready the rolling airframe missiles." The ship's alarm began to wail. It was a low, mournful sound that echoed through the steel hallways. Sailors who had been resting scrambled to their stations. They pulled on flash gear and helmets. The professional calm of the evening was gone. Miller spoke into the fleet radio. "Ross, this is Porter. We are being painted by multiple coastal batteries. Assume defensive posture, Echo. We are in the middle of a focused engagement zone." The response from the United States ship Ross was immediate. "Porter, this is Ross. We have the same. We are seeing a high-density threat environment. The air is getting very crowded." "Confirm," Miller said. "Wait. My display is ghosting. I have a new contact. Altitude is 0. Speed is 40 knots. It is coming from the sea, not the land." The radar screen flickered. A small, fast-moving icon appeared. Then another. They were not missiles. They were small boats, and they were moving directly toward the destroyers. The trap was closing. The Americans had fired their long-range weapons. Now the enemy was coming in close. 9:40 in the evening. The North Arabian Sea. The radar display on the United States ship Porter was becoming a crowded forest of digital noise. The 12 fast attack craft were not approaching in a straight line. They were weaving. They were using the massive hulls of nearby commercial oil tankers as physical shields. This was a classic asymmetric tactic. By staying close to the neutral merchant ships, the Iranian boats made it impossible for the American destroyers to use their long-range missiles without risking a massive international incident. Captain Miller stood on the bridge wing. He looked through his high-powered binoculars. In the distance, he could see the white wake of a small boat cutting through the dark water. It was moving at over 40 knots. "Bridge. Combat." The tactical action officer spoke over the internal circuit. "The swarm is splitting. 5 contacts are breaking east toward the Ross. 7 are maintaining a closing heading on our starboard quarter. Range is 4,000 yards. Miller stepped back inside the darkened bridge. "Have we broadcast the warnings?" "Confirmed, sir," the officer replied. "We have issued warnings on the international hailing frequency. We have used the long-range acoustic device. They are not responding. They are accelerating." The rules of engagement were clear, but they were also a trap. To fire first would be a hostile act. To wait for the enemy to fire could be fatal. At 40 knots, a fast attack craft could bridge the remaining distance in less than 3 minutes. 9:45 in the evening. On board an Iranian fast attack craft, the commander of the lead boat gripped a steel rail as the hull slammed against the waves. He was surrounded by the smell of salt and diesel fuel. On the deck behind him, a twin-barrel heavy machine gun was manned by a sailor in a life vest. Next to the gun was a rack of unguided rockets. The commander did not intend to sink a destroyer with a machine gun. His mission was different. He was the catalyst. He was there to force the Americans to make a mistake. He watched the massive gray silhouette of the Porter through the spray. He saw the flashes of the American searchlights. They were blindingly bright. "Stay close to the tanker," the commander shouted over the engine roar. "If they fire, they hit the oil. They will not take that risk." He looked at his GPS. He was now within 3,000 yards of the American warship. He could see the automated turret of the 20mm close-in weapon system on the Porter. It was tracking his boat. The mechanical eye of the gun was following his every move. It was a cold, robotic stare. 9:52 in the evening. The bridge of the United States ship Porter. The tension was a physical weight in the room. The distance was closing. 2,000 yards. 1,500. The speedboats were now visible to the naked eye without binoculars. "Sir, command is on the line," the communications officer said. "The Commodore wants a status update." Miller took the handset. "Commodore, this is Porter. We have 7 fast attack craft closing at high speed. They are using a Liberian-flagged tanker as a screen. I cannot clear the background for a main gun solution. I am requesting permission to fire warning shots with the 50 caliber teams." The response was clipped. "Permission granted, Porter. Do not escalate unless a hostile act is observed, but do not allow them to reach the hull." Miller looked at the officer of the deck. "Fire a burst across the lead boat's bow. 500 yards lead. Make it clear." On the starboard rail, a sailor squeezed the trigger of a heavy machine gun. The rhythmic thumping shook the deck. Red tracer rounds arched into the night sky. They splashed into the water well ahead of the lead Iranian boat. The geysers of water were illuminated by the searchlights. The Iranian boat did not slow down. It veered sharper toward the Porter. "He is not turning away," the tactical officer shouted. "He is crossing our wake. Range is 800 yards. "Another burst," Miller ordered. "Put it closer." The machine gun fired again. This time, the tracers skipped off the water just 50 yards from the Iranian hull. The lead boat finally banked hard to the left. It was a violent, aggressive maneuver. But as it turned, the American crew saw something that changed the nature of the engagement. The lead boat was not empty. It was trailing a long, floating line. And attached to that line were several dark, bobbing objects. "Mines!" the officer of the deck whispered. "They are dropping mines in our path." The first aggressive move had been made. The Iranian crew had not fired a shot, but they had just turned the water into a graveyard. 9:55 in the evening. The North Arabian Sea. The United States ship Porter shuddered as its 4 gas turbine engines surged to maximum power. The order for emergency flank speed had been instantaneous. On the bridge, the deck tilted sharply to the left. The ship was heeling over as it began a violent turn to avoid the drifting mines. Left full rudder. All engines ahead flank. The officer of the deck shouted over the roar of the wind. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer gripped the edge of his console. Sonar. Bridge. Report the status of those contacts. Are they tethered or drifting? The sonar operator responded with a voice that was tight but controlled. "They appear to be drifting, sir. I count 5 distinct signatures. They are approximately 300 yards off the starboard bow and closing. The current is pushing them directly into our path." "Bridge. Combat," the tactical officer called. "We need more room. If we stay on this heading, we will clear the mines, but we will be within 500 yards of the Iranian lead boat. He is positioning himself to block our exit." Captain Miller looked at the digital plot. He could see the geometry of the trap. To avoid the mines, he had to move toward the enemy boats. To avoid the enemy boats, he had to risk the mines. It was a calculated maneuver, designed to force a collision or a close-quarters engagement. 10:02 in the evening. 6 miles to the east. The United States ship Ross was facing its own crisis. 5 Iranian fast attack craft were circling the destroyer like wolves. They were not dropping mines. They were doing something more subtle. They were using high-powered green lasers to blind the bridge crew and the optical sensors of the ship's weapon systems. Ross. This is Porter. Miller's voice came over the fleet radio. We are maneuvering to avoid drifting ordnance. What is your status? The captain of the Ross responded immediately. Porter. This is Ross. We are under sustained laser illumination. Our primary optics are degraded. We have 2 Iranian helicopters launched from the mainland. They are hovering at 1,000 feet, 5 miles out. They are not squawking a civilian code. We are tracking them as hostile. The escalation was no longer a series of isolated incidents. It was a synchronized, multi-domain squeeze. The Iranians were using every tool in their inventory to overwhelm the American decision-making process. 10:10 in the evening. The Iranian command center. General Reza watched the live feed from one of the helicopters. On the screen, he could see the gray shape of the Ross surrounded by the white wakes of the fast attack craft. It looked like a silent movie. The Americans are disciplined, Reza observed. They have not fired their main guns. They are still trying to find a peaceful way out of the circle. His senior aide stood nearby. The Western media is already reporting the Tomahawk strikes. General. The Americans are being portrayed as the aggressors. If they fire on the boats now, they are hunting small targets after a failed mission. Exactly, Reza said. Wait until the porter clears the minefield. When they reach the open water, tell the coastal batteries to achieve a full fire control lock. I want the Americans to hear the tone of a missile launch sequence in their headsets. I want them to believe the next second is their last. 10:15 in the evening, inside the porter. The ship had successfully cleared the last of the drifting mines. The hull leveled out as the rudder returned to center. But the relief was short-lived. A new sound erupted in the Combat Information Center. It was a high-pitched, continuous scream. Master warning. Missile approach warning, the tactical officer yelled. I have a fire control lock from the coast. It is a silkworm battery. He has a solid track. He is in the final stages of a launch sequence. Captain Miller did not hesitate. The time for warning shots had passed. The enemy had moved from harassment to a lethal threat. Enable the AEGIS system. Set to auto special. All weapon systems are free to engage any target presenting a hostile act or intent. The ship's computer took control of the radar. The massive phased array panels on the side of the superstructure began to pulse with incredible power. The air around the ship seemed to vibrate with static electricity. Targeting the shore battery, the officer said, we have a solution for a Sea Sparrow interceptor. Hold, Miller said. His heart was hammering against his ribs, but his voice was like ice. Wait for the launch. If we fire first, we start the war. If he fires first, we end it. The entire crew of the launch. Porter held their breath. On the screen, the Iranian missile icon was flashing red. The timer was counting down. Both sides were now fully committed. The next 30 seconds would determine if the night ended in a diplomatic crisis or a regional conflagration. The silence in the room was absolute. Then, the computer spoke. 10:16 in the evening. The North Arabian Sea. The audio warning in the Combat Information Center was a continuous, high-pitched scream. It was the digital sound of a fire control radar from the Iranian coast locking onto the United States ship porter. The AEGIS weapon system was now in its most aggressive automatic mode. The computer was ready to launch. It was waiting for a human finger to press a button, or for the enemy to fire first. Captain Miller watched the countdown on the master display. 10 seconds to a projected launch. 9, 8. His hands were flat on the console. Hold fire, he said. His voice was a whisper. It was barely audible over the electronic noise. Hold fire. Do not give them the first shot. 10, 16, and 30 seconds. The Iranian missile battery. Inside the mobile launcher on the coast, the technician looked at his commander. The screen was green, the target was centered, the missile was warm. "Command, we have a solid lock," the technician said, requesting final authorization to fire. General Reza stood in his bunker. He looked at the live feed from the hovering helicopter. He saw the Porter turning. He saw the Ross. He saw the small boats. He knew that if he gave the order, the world would change in 5 minutes. He picked up the secure phone. His hand was steady. He did not look at the screen. He looked at the wall. 10:17 in the evening. The bridge of the Porter. The tactical officer's voice was urgent. "Sir, the lock is steady. They are at the terminal phase of the sequence. Any second now. We need to engage the shore battery before they launch." Miller did not move. He was staring at the horizon. He was looking for the flash of a rocket motor. He knew the Silkworm missile would be visible the moment it left the rail. He knew his ship had less than 60 seconds to react once the missile was airborne. 5 seconds. 4. 3. The air in the room felt like it was under pressure. Every sailor was frozen at their station. They were waiting for the impact. They were waiting for the fire. They were waiting for the command to kill or the command to die. 2, 1, 0. The display flickered. The red icon for the missile launch did not disappear. It stayed. It pulsed. The scream of the radar warning reached a new, agonizing level of intensity. The system was telling the crew that the missile was already on its way. But there was no flash on the horizon. There was no heat signature on the infrared cameras. "I have a launch indication," the tactical officer shouted. "Incoming. Bearing 080. Missile is in the air. Break. Break." The electronic warfare officer screamed. "The signal is wrong. Look at the frequency. This is not a silkworm. This is something else." 10, 17, and 45 seconds. The Combat Information Center of the Ross. "Multiple contacts," the operator yelled. "I have 20. No. 30 new signatures. They are everywhere. They are on the water and in the air. High speed. They are coming from every direction." The radar screens on both ships suddenly turned into a solid mass of green and red. The icons were overlapping. They were moving in impossible patterns. They were accelerating to Mach 3 and then stopping. They were diving into the water and then reappearing at 10,000 feet. "Computer failure," the tactical officer on the Porter said. His voice was cracking. "Sir, the AEGIS system is crashing. It cannot process the data. It is seeing too many targets. It is seeing ghosts." On the Iranian side, the technician in the bunker fell back from his screen. "General, our systems, they are gone. The radar is showing the American fleet is 300 ships. It is showing they are launching hundreds of missiles at us." General Reza dropped the phone. He looked at the screen. The tactical map was a chaotic swarm of lights. It looked like a broken television. "Is it an American hack?" he asked. "No," the technician whispered. "It is our own system. It is fighting itself. Everything is locked. Everything is frozen." 10:18 in the evening. The bridge of the Porter. Captain Miller looked out the window. The sky was empty. The sea was dark. There were no missiles. There were no flashes of light. There was only the sound of his own heavy breathing and the digital screaming of a dying computer. He looked at the radar screen one last time. Every icon disappeared at once. The screen went black. Then the lights on the bridge flickered and died. A heavy, absolute silence fell over the ship. The engines were still humming. The hull was still moving. But the weapons were dead. The sensors were blind. 10:19 in the evening. The North Arabian Sea. The bridge of the United States ship Porter was a tomb of red emergency light. The hum of the ventilation had dropped to a low moan. Captain Miller stood in the center of the room. He felt the vibration of the deck beneath his boots. The ship was still moving. The engines were still turning. But every digital eye on the vessel had been poked out. "Status report," Miller said. His voice was calm. It was the calm of a man who had run out of things to lose. The tactical action officer was illuminated by the glow of a handheld flashlight. "Sir, the AEGIS system is unresponsive. We are attempting a hard reset of the primary processors. We have lost all external data links. We cannot see the Ross. We cannot see the coast." "And the Iranian boats?" Miller asked. "Visual only, sir," the officer replied. He pointed a flashlight out the starboard window. 1,000 yards away, the lead Iranian fast attack craft was visible in the moonlight. It was not moving. The white wake that had followed it for miles was gone. It was bobbing on the swells like a piece of driftwood. The other boats in the swarm were doing the same. Their engines had stopped. Their searchlights were dark. 10:21 in the evening. The Iranian command center, General Reza, stood in total darkness. The air in the bunker was growing warm as the cooling systems failed. His technicians were using their mobile phones as flashlights. They were tapping at dead keyboards. "Is it a cyber attack?" Reza asked. "It is not an attack, General," a voice said from the shadows. "An attack would leave a trace. This is a void. It is as if the very air has stopped carrying our signals." Reza walked toward the heavy steel door of the bunker. He pushed it open and stepped out into the night air. He looked up at the sky. The stars were bright and clear. There were no planes, there were no missiles, but there was something else. High above the Strait of Hormuz, a massive circle of clouds was forming. It was perfect. It was symmetrical. It was rotating slowly in a sky where there was no wind. At the center of the circle, there was nothing but a deep and empty blackness. 10:25 in the evening, the bridge of the Porter. "Sir, I have a radio signal," the communications officer said. "It is not on any military frequency. It is on the International Distress Channel. But it is not a voice." "Put it on the speaker," Miller ordered. A sound filled the bridge. It was not static. It was a rhythmic, pulsing tone. It sounded like a heartbeat. It was deep and resonant. It seemed to vibrate in the chests of every sailor in the room. It was not coming from a radio transmitter on land. The signal strength was the same in every direction. It was everywhere. Miller looked out at the Iranian boat. He saw a man standing on its deck. The man was looking up at the sky. He was holding a flare gun, but he did not fire it. He looked afraid. "Combat. Bridge." Miller spoke into the internal phone. "Are we getting anything on the backup sensors?" "Sir, we have one return," the tactical officer said. "The infrared camera on the mast just came back online. It is pointing straight up. What does it see?" "Nothing that makes sense, sir. It is showing a thermal signature of 4,000 degrees Celsius. It is the size of an aircraft carrier, and it is sitting exactly 2 miles above us. It is not moving. It is just there." The pivot had arrived. The conflict between the two nations had been interrupted by a third party that neither side could identify. The weapons that had been ready to fire 2 minutes ago were now irrelevant. The electronic war had been ended by a power that made their most advanced systems look like toys. The heartbeat on the radio stopped. The silence that followed was even heavier than the noise. Then, every light on the Porter flashed to full brightness. The radar screens flickered. The icons returned. But they were different now. Every Iranian boat was marked in blue. Every coastal battery was marked in blue. The computer was no longer identifying them as enemies. It was identifying them as part of the same group. The screen showed 2,000 blue icons. And in the center of the display, there was a single, massive red circle. "It is not a ghost," the tactical officer whispered. "It is a command." 10:26 in the evening. The Combat Information Center of the United States Ship Porter. The room was no longer red. The overhead lights had returned to a sterile, bright white. On the master engagement display, the world had been redefined. The Iranian fast attack craft, the coastal missile batteries, and the United States ship Ross were all pulsing with a steady blue light. In the logic of the Aegis weapon system, blue meant friendly. It meant ally. It meant part of the same team. And in the center of the screen, hovering directly over the coordinates of the Porter, was a single crimson circle. It was massive. It covered an area of nearly 5 miles. The computer did not classify it as an aircraft or a ship. It simply labeled it as a primary threat. Captain Miller stood frozen. He looked at the tactical action officer. "Explain the sensor fusion. Why are the Iranians blue?" The officer was typing furiously. His face was pale. "Sir, I am not doing this. The system is slaving itself to an external source. We are receiving a high-bandwidth data stream from the overhead contact. It is overriding our identification, friend or foe protocols. It has merged our radar network with the Iranian land-based sensors. We are looking at a unified theater map. Can we, targeting the red circle?" Miller asked. "Negative, sir," the officer replied. "The fire control computer refuses the command. It is returning a logical error. It says, we cannot fire on a target that is currently providing our own targeting data." 10:31 in the evening. The Iranian command center, General Reza, was back inside the bunker. The power had returned as suddenly as it had vanished. He was staring at the same unified map. He saw the American destroyers. He saw his own boats. They were all linked by a web of glowing blue lines. His senior technician turned to him. "General, we have lost control of the coastal batteries. The launch computers are locked. They are being fed a defensive solution by the object in the sky." "A defensive solution against what?" Reza asked. "Against itself," the technician said. "The object is broadcasting a signal that mimics a countdown. Every radar in the region thinks 1,000 missiles are about to impact. But the source of the missiles is the object. It is creating a state of total tactical paralysis." 10:35 in the evening. The North Arabian Sea. On the surface of the water, the commander of the Iranian-led boat looked up. The giant circle of clouds was still there. It was glowing with a faint, pulsing violet light. He picked up his radio. He expected static. Instead, he heard a voice. "United States Ship Porter. This is Iranian Patrol Craft 7. Do you receive?" The bridge of the porter went silent. The communications officer looked at Miller. Miller nodded. "This is Porter. We hear you." "The sky is open," the Iranian commander said. His voice was trembling. "My engines are dead. My weapons are locked. I am looking at your ship. I am not moving. Do you intend to fire?" Miller looked at the big screen. He looked at the red circle that dominated the sky. "Patrol Craft 7. This is Porter. We are in the same condition. We have no intention of firing. We are observing the overhead contact. It is not a weapon," the Iranian commander said. "It is a wall." The realization was beginning to settle over both commands. The tactical escalation had been stopped by a physical intervention. The thousands of tons of steel and high explosives in the water were now nothing more than spectators. The technology that had been designed to win a war was being used to prevent one. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical officer called out a change. "Sir, the red circle is moving. It is increasing altitude. It is accelerating." The infrared camera showed the massive thermal signature shrinking. It was moving straight up. It was not using wings. It was not using a rocket motor. It was simply departing the atmosphere. "Speed is Mach 5, the officer said. "Mach 10, Mach 20. It is out of the sensor envelope. It is gone." The lights on the bridge flickered once more. The unified map vanished. The blue icons turned back to their original colors. The Iranian boats were once again potential threats. The coastal batteries were once again hostile. But the tension was gone. The momentum of the battle had been shattered. Miller looked at the screen. The red circle was gone. The sky was empty. "Confirm status of the Ross," he said. "Ross is back online, sir. They are reporting all systems normal. The Iranian boats are turning back toward the coast. They are disengaging." The crisis had reached its peak and collapsed in less than 10 minutes. But the reassessment was only beginning. 10:45 in the evening. The North Arabian Sea. The digital noise that had smothered the region was gone. The radar screens on the United States ship porter had returned to their standard tactical display. The massive red circle had vanished into the upper atmosphere. The air was empty of threats, but the tension remained. It was a different kind of pressure now. It was the weight of a shared and impossible experience. Captain Miller stood by the glass of the bridge. He watched the last of the Iranian fast attack craft turn away. They were no longer weaving between the tankers. They were heading north toward the coast at a steady, non-aggressive speed. There were no more lasers. There were no more warning shots. The tactical action officer spoke from the shadows. Sir, the United States ship Ross is reporting a clear deck. They are standing down from general quarters. Their sensor suite is nominal. And the coastal batteries? Miller asked. They are in a passive mode, sir. We are still being tracked. But the fire control locks have been dropped. It looks like they are as confused as we are. 11:15 in the evening. The Iranian command center. General Reza sat at his desk. The lights were steady now. The emergency generators had been deactivated. On his screen, the American destroyers were moving slowly to the south. They were leaving the engagement zone. They were not running. They were withdrawing with professional deliberation. A secure phone on his desk began to ring. It was a direct line from the Ministry of Defense. Reza picked it up. He did not say his name. He simply listened. The voice on the other end was quiet. The Americans have signaled through the Swiss embassy. They are claiming a technical malfunction. They are proposing a temporary suspension of all maritime operations in the sector for 48 hours. Reza looked at the empty space on his radar map where the object had been. A technical malfunction. Is that what we are calling it? It is the only thing the politicians can agree on, the voice replied. What did your sensors record? Everything and nothing, Reza said. We saw a unified network. We saw a power that treated our missiles like static. If we tell the truth, we will be laughed at. If we lie, we might survive the night. The order is to accept the suspension, the voice said. Bring the boats home. Do not engage. Do not illuminate. The night is over. 11:30 in the evening. The bridge of the Porter. The ship was back to a standard steaming watch. The adrenaline that had fueled the crew for the last 3 hours was fading. It was being replaced by a deep, hollow exhaustion. Sailors moved with heavy steps. They spoke in low voices. The communications officer approached Miller. Sir, we have a message from the Commodore. We are to proceed to the primary refueling point. All sensor data from the last hour is to be encrypted and air-gapped. We are under a total information blackout. Miller nodded. He had expected nothing less. Confirm the order and tell the crew they did well. They are asking questions, sir, the officer said. They want to know what it was. Miller looked out at the black water. Tell them it was a sensor ghost. Tell them the heat and the humidity caused a massive atmospheric reflection. Tell them whatever the manual says is a lie. The officer paused. Do you think they will believe that, sir? No, Miller said. But in this business, belief is a luxury. We are here to manage the reality. And the reality is that no one fired a shot when it mattered most. That is the only victory we are going to get. The United States ship Porter increased its speed to 20 knots. It moved away from the Iranian coast. Behind it, the lights of the Iranian patrol boats disappeared into the haze of the horizon. The crisis had been averted. The ships were safe. But the world felt smaller than it had 2 hours ago. The morning was still 2 hours away. It would bring a new set of problems. But for now, there was only the sound of the hull cutting through the waves. 11:45 in the evening. The North Arabian Sea. The United States ship Porter moved with a steady, rhythmic pulse. The emergency power state had been canceled. The red lights of the Combat Information Center had been replaced by the standard low-level white illumination. The tension was not gone. It had simply changed shape. It was no longer the sharp fear of a missile impact. It was the heavy, dull weight of a mystery that could not be solved. Inside the weapons control booth, a young technician sat, with his hands in his lap. He was watching the diagnostic screens. The vertical launch cells were locked. The Tomahawk mission was over. 12 missiles had been fired. 6 targets had been destroyed. But the mission felt like a failure. Status of the AEGIS system, Captain Miller said. He was standing behind the console. He had not sat down in 4 hours. Systems are nominal, sir, the technician replied. The data buffers are clear. The processors are running at normal temperatures. It is as if the crash never happened. And the recorded data? Miller asked. The server recorded 30 seconds of corrupted telemetry during the peak of the event. It shows the atmospheric contact at 0 altitude, and then at 50 miles in less than 1 second. The software has flagged it as a hardware error. Miller nodded. He knew the software was designed to reject what it could not understand. A sensor that moves at Mach 20 from a standing start is a mathematical impossibility for the current version of the AEGIS code. The machine was protecting itself by calling the truth a lie. Midnight. The Iranian coastline near Bandar Abbas. The mobile missile batteries were no longer pointing at the sea. The heavy trucks were moving back into the deep, reinforced tunnels carved into the mountainside. The crews worked in total silence. There was no shouting. There was no radio chatter. They moved with the efficiency of men who wanted to be forgotten. General Reza watched the last vehicle disappear into the dark. He stood on a rocky outcrop overlooking the water. In the distance, he could see the faint lights of a passing commercial tanker. It was a Dutch vessel. It was carrying oil that would eventually power a city in Europe. The tanker did not know how close it had come to being a casualty of a regional war. His aide approached him. "General, the ministry has issued the final report. It states that the American missiles hit abandoned structures. It claims our electronic warfare units successfully confused the American targeting systems. There is no mention of the aerial anomaly." Reza turned his head. "And our own logs? They are being archived at the highest level of security," the aide said. "The technicians who saw the unified map have been told it was a simulation. They have been ordered not to discuss the simulation with anyone outside this room." "Good," Reza said. "We will pretend the world is the same as it was yesterday. It is safer that way." 12:15 in the morning. The United States ship Ross and the United States ship Porter. The two destroyers were now 50 miles apart. They were moving toward a rendezvous with a carrier strike group further south. The sea was calm. The moon had risen higher. It was a beautiful, clear night. If not for the 12 empty launch cells on the decks, there would be no physical evidence that anything had happened at all. Captain Miller sat in his chair on the bridge. He looked at the ship's log. He had to sign the official entry for the night's action. He read the words carefully. They were professional. They were dry. They described a limited retaliatory strike against hostile radar installations. They described the successful engagement of 6 coordinates. He picked up a pen. He hesitated for a second. He thought about the red circle on his screen. He thought about the heartbeat on the radio. He thought about the Iranian commander, who had sounded so human and so afraid. Then he signed his name. The crisis was over. The professional routine of the United States Navy continued. The watch was changed. The sensors were monitored. The coffee was brewed in the galley. There was no celebration. There was no sense of victory. There was only the quiet, steady hum of a warship moving through a dark and uncertain ocean. The night was ending. The tactical phase was complete. 3 days later. The Pentagon. Washington. District of Columbia. The conference room was deep underground. It was a space designed for absolute secrecy. On the central table, high-resolution satellite photographs were spread out. They showed the charred remains of the 4 Iranian radar sites. Beside them were the images of the 2 empty concrete pads at the other locations. "The damage is total," he said. A senior intelligence analyst pointed a laser at the first image. The Tomahawk missiles hit within 3 meters of the center of the arrays. In terms of kinetic success, the mission was flawless. The Secretary of Defense looked at the images of the empty sites. "And these? Those were the decoys, sir," the analyst replied. But they were not just plywood. They were sophisticated thermal replicas. The Iranians moved the real equipment 6 hours before the launch. They knew exactly which coordinates we were targeting. They even knew the timing of the strike to within 15 minutes. The room went silent. The implication was clear. This was not a failure of technology. It was a failure of security. The mission had been compromised before the first missile left the vertical launch cells. "How did they know?" the secretary asked. "Our internal investigation is ongoing," the analyst said. But the data suggests the leak came from the strategic planning level. The Iranians did not just react. They choreographed their response. They allowed us to destroy 4 older sites to satisfy our need for a retaliatory strike, but they preserved their most modern assets. They played us into a stalemate. At the same hour in Tehran, General Reza was presenting a similar report to his superiors. He did not speak of victory, he spoke of survival. The Americans achieved their political objective, Reza said. They can tell their people they struck back. But we achieved our tactical objective. We proved that their secrets are not safe, and we showed them that we can stand our ground without starting a total war. The Supreme National Security Council listened in silence. One member leaned forward. And the event in the sky? The malfunction? Reza paused. This was the part of the report that did not fit into any strategy. The Americans have officially labeled it an atmospheric anomaly. We have done the same. It is the only way to move forward without admitting that we both lost control of our weapons for 10 minutes. Do you believe it was an anomaly, General? No, Reza said. I believe something intervened. I believe that when we reached the edge of the cliff, the ground was moved beneath our feet. We were not allowed to fall, but we were also not allowed to win. Back in Washington, the Secretary of Defense closed the folder. The public narrative is set. The USS Porter and the USS Ross are returning to port. The Iranians are claiming their defenses were successful. The tension in the Strait of Hormuz is de-escalating. On paper, the crisis is over. And the leak? The analyst asked. We will find the source, the secretary said, but we will never acknowledge it publicly. If the world knows we cannot keep a secret, our deterrence is gone. We will continue the investigation in the shadows. The strategic assessment was cold and calculated. Both nations had looked into the abyss and blinked. But they had not blinked because of each other. They had blinked because they realized they were not the only players on the board. The political fallout was managed with surgical precision. Speeches were written. Press releases were issued. The truth was buried under layers of official denial. The world moved on to the next crisis. But in the quiet offices of the Pentagon and the bunkers of Tehran, the maps were being redrawn. The morning was bright in Washington. It was clear and calm. But the men in the room knew that the silence was temporary. 1 month later, 10 in the morning, Newport, Rhode Island. The lecture hall at the Naval War College was filled with senior officers. They were there to study the tactical evolution of the North Arabian Sea engagement. On the screen was a simplified map of the Iranian coast. The 12 Tomahawk missile tracks were highlighted in blue. An instructor stood at the podium. He did not look at the screen. He looked at the faces of the commanders. The instructor spoke. We call this case study the empty grid. On the surface, it was a textbook execution of a retaliatory strike. The Porter and the Ross fired 12 missiles. They destroyed 4 active radar sites. They sent a message of deterrence. But the tactical success hides a strategic failure. The Iranians knew the coordinates. They knew the timing. They traded hardware for intelligence. They showed us that our kill chain has a leak at the highest level. The officers took notes in silence. None of them asked about the 10 minutes of sensor failure. None of them mentioned the red circle or the heartbeat on the radio. Those details had been removed from the official curriculum. They existed only in the private memories of the crews who had been there. The Pentagon had scrubbed the logs. The AEGIS data had been rewritten to reflect an atmospheric anomaly. In Tehran, the silence was just as absolute. General Reza had been moved to a quiet administrative post in the interior. His reports on the aerial intervention had been classified as state secrets. He spent his afternoons in a small garden, watching the birds. He no longer looked at radar screens. He knew that the technology he had spent his life mastering was fragile. He knew that the real power in the world did not belong to the men with the missiles. The lesson of the night was not about firepower. It was about restraint. Modern warfare is a game of perceptions. If the enemy knows what you are going to do, the weapons are irrelevant. If a third party can turn off an entire fleet with a single pulse, the war is already over before it begins. The two nations had been like children fighting over a toy, only to have the toy taken away by a hand they could not see. The empty concrete pads at Sites 5 and 6 remained as a monument to the deception. They were a reminder that in the age of information, what you do not see is more important than what you do. The United States ship porter was back at sea. The Iranian batteries were back in their tunnels. The grid was empty, but the message was received by both sides. The world had reached the edge of the abyss and had been pushed back by something it could not name. The peace was fragile. It was built on a foundation of silence and shared confusion. History is often written by the victors, but sometimes history is written by the people who choose not to fight. On that night in the North Arabian Sea, there were no victors. There were only survivors. In the silence of the aftermath, that was enough. The sky remained clear. The ocean remained deep, and the truth remained hidden in the static of 1,000 radar screens. The incident would eventually become a footnote in military history, but for those who were on the water that night, it was the moment they realized they were not alone in the dark.